coming out of your ears.
There you go.
We're getting started.
Okay, we'll get started in just a second here. Hey, Sean, are you ready to go?
Yes, Deputy Mayor, I am.
Thank you so much. All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our City Council study session for October 11th, 2021. We'll call this meeting to order. And per Governor Inslee's emergency proclamation 20-05 and 20-28, the City of Auburn and the City of Auburn Resolution number 5581, City of Auburn has designated meeting locations as virtual for all regular, special, and study session meetings of the City Council and for the committees, boards, and commissions of the city. And with that, Sean, will you please call the roll?
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Here.
Councilmember Baggett.
Here.
Councilmember Brown.
Here.
Councilmember J. Raj.
I'm here.
Councilmember Malinga.
Here.
Councilmember Stearns. Councilmember Stearns. Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Here.
Okay, hopefully Councilmember Stearns will be joining us momentarily. I do not believe we have any announcements, reports, or presentations.
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. All right, we'll move into our agenda items for council discussion this evening. And the first item on the agenda is the Regional Homelessness Authority Sub-Regional Planning Update. And with that, I'll turn it over to Director Tate.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor and City Council members. My part's going to be real short. I'd just like to make an introduction. And joining us tonight from the King County Regional Homelessness Authority are Alexis Mercedes Rink, who's the Sub-Regional Planning Manager. You may recall Alexis provided a presentation probably about 6 weeks ago or so to City Council. And also Paul Tan, who's a South King County Sub-Regional Planning Coordinator. So they're going to provide a presentation to us this evening. And I will turn it over to Alexis right now.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And thank you all for having us again to provide this update. Before I really get started into the presentation, I do want to offer an opportunity for my colleague and newest team member to the sub-regional planning team to introduce himself. So Paul, if you would like to share a couple words about your new role and your background, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Tan. I'm happy to be in my, I think it's second week now of working on Alexis's team, and I'm incredibly excited to be kind of the advocate for South King County. And so as we build and plan out this new, truly new revision of the work, I'm hopeful that some of the background that I've been involved with will help kind of elicit conversations and engagement in the community. I've been here in the Seattle and King County region for 27 years and worked with Lutheran Community Services Northwest, Youth Care in Seattle, Friends of Youth on the East Side, Kent Youth and Family Services in the South, and have also been really intimately involved with anti-trafficking and DV work in the region on task force, and obviously homelessness is an issue that I think is something that really is a reflection on healthy communities. And so my perspective coming into this work is really about how can we be kind of embracing everyone in our communities, and what are ways in which we can kind of elicit some more engagement with folks who are ready to be involved and maybe not given the right set of tools or connected in the ways in which we can kind of utilize everyone's gifts to be part of this effort. So I'm happy to be here and really looking forward to working further with you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Paul. I'm just so grateful that he's joined us from Kent Youth and Family Services and wants to be a part of the sub-regional planning team, and just so excited to see the amazing things that he's going to do in this role. So for tonight, providing an update on this draft sub-regional planning snapshot report. Just a quick overview. First, we'll be going over some updates around definitions for subregions, an overview on regional engagement, and then progress updates for key components 1 through 3. We'll touch on an updated timeline, and then happy to take questions at the end. So our update for subregions, we have 7 subregions now. Probably the biggest update as it pertains to South King County is that we have a Southeast/South Valley King County designation, which includes Maple Valley, Black Diamond, Covington, and Enumclaw. And then we also are working with Skyway and White Center to develop and figure out what an urban unincorporated King County subregion distinction would be. So in total, 7 subregions. To be noted, Seattle Metro is also a subregion. It's down in the bottom corner. In terms of regional engagement, we have been out and about. I think at the time I turned in these slides, this was accurate, but this has already changed since. So at the time I sent over these slides to your team, we had engaged with 206 different folks across the region, 127 different organizations and entities. The main kind of types of stakeholders we're working with include like government folks, service providers, our faith-based partners, regional coalitions, folks from business and philanthropy, and then community-based organizations. The majority of our engagement so far has actually been with South and Southeast King County, and I'm sure that'll only grow now that we have Paul on board. There are, in addition to having these one-on-one sessions that the previous slide kind of alluded to, I want to note that those 206 folks that I've had the opportunity to meet with, those were all one-on-one 30 to 60-minute sit-down conversations talking about what was going on at their agency, what they're seeing within the region, their experiences across the pandemic, and so on. But we also have 4 other key ways of engaging with folks across the region. We've been attending a number of sub-regional meetings. We've identified 17 sub-regional tables that we are now regularly attending, and not only attending to present and seek input from, but also just to listen and understand like the conversations that are happening. And further, we're trying to also make the knowledge about these tables more widespread, so more folks can attend. Maybe they have been a part of a particular subregion for a while, but are not familiar with this particular group. So we're doing our part to just make the knowledge around some of these tables just more well known. Second piece of this is we've been doing site visits. As we touched on here, we had an opportunity to visit with the city of Auburn, but we've been out in the Snoqualmie Valley, we've been to Burien, and as well as Redmond. We've had the opportunity to visit in person to 20 different service provider locations. We've been continuing to do council presentations as we want to get city councils engaged in the work that we're doing and familiar with what we do as an agency. And then I send out a weekly email update that is really touching on everything that's going on at the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. Sometimes they're short, but wanting to have a regular touch point with all of our folks around the region so they can kind of know what we're up to. A little bit about things that we're hearing. A lot of, it's across the spectrum in terms of the things that we're hearing from our providers. I think it's worth sharing that there is a lot of fatigue and just burnout across provider organizations in light of the pandemic. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody here in particular. We've been hearing desire for us to assist in coordinating for outreach strategies in different subregions. We've been hearing about kind of tied to burnout at provider agencies, hiring challenges and staffing shortages. And also learning a bit more about the types of collaboration that has been happening within subregions, the also just ways that folks have been working together, cities have been working together, and also been learning a bit more about some of the substance abuse just patterns. As we know, some of that overlaps into this work, so trying to track and understand some of the higher usage of substances and really coordinating with our friends at Public Health to try and just strategically plan around that as well. With regards to key component 1, we were able to get analysis of 2020 HMIS data on bed type. So we were given this data set and we conducted a quick analysis looking at 3 types of beds. So looking at emergency shelter beds, permanent supportive housing beds, and transitional housing beds. The chart all the way to the right shows a distribution among the 5 rural and suburban subregions. And so it should be noted that I believe there are, when you combine South King County and Southeast King County, that region actually has the most number of bed types. I believe the highest number of permanent supportive housing bed types. As we are continuing to build out key component number 1 and have a better understanding of our landscape of services across the region, we are sending out a survey to providers, primarily trying to dig into for providers that are what we would consider countywide providers, trying to have a better understanding of how their services are showing up in specific subregions. So we're going to actually be sending that out next Monday, and working also in one-on-one settings to just make sure that we can get as many responses as possible to that. We feel about 80% confident at this point about the information that we do have, but we really wanted to issue this survey to just get further confirmation and make sure that we're not missing any vital services that providers are doing. And also embedded in that survey, we're also asking questions around COVID vaccination rates and policies. This section in key component 1, we're also looking at really a breakdown of all different types of services and how they're showing up in each subregion. Key component number 2 is an update around funding and investment. We've identified that 21 cities in King County are putting funding towards homelessness response and contracting to local services providers around the region. The draft snapshot report details how we're also the many studies that have been done that identify the scale of resources needed to build, preserve, and subsidize housing for folks who are 0 to 30% AMI. A lot of those are tied to the Regional Affordable Housing Task Force report and some of the work of the Affordable Housing Committee, identifying how much money is needed to support this kind of housing. This section of the report also touches on a McKinsey report that came out in 2018 as well. And so this section of the report also touches on some of the other types of funding that we really want to dig into, namely looking at private investment, faith-based, and also trying to put together a formula to better determine the in-kind investment that has gone into service response around the region. And the last piece is around centering lived experience. I continue to meet with our Lived Experience Coalition on a weekly basis. I provide updates at the Friday Lived Experience Coalition General Meeting. And we've recently stood up a work group to solicit feedback and just have further conversation around how we can better center lived experience and develop a strategy for how we can better understand lived experience in the different sub-regions. There's just a lot of work to be done on this front because we want to make sure that we are tapping into and uplifting perspectives of lived experience in each sub-region. Right now, we're looking at something like a sort of focus group. So looking at a series of focus groups that is specific to lived experience within each sub-region of King County. And so we have a revised timeline. I want to emphasize that we are currently in what we're calling phase 1, which is just initial information gathering and relationship building. There are so many different entities involved in this work and wanting to make sure that we are in relationship with a lot of different types of stakeholders. Personally, I'm making a concerted effort at this point to be connecting more to our school districts, our hospitals, and law enforcement. Those are 3 types of stakeholders that we have not yet fully engaged in on the sub-regional planning team. So that is our focus right now, to tap into those groups. And it is our goal to have fully gathered all of the kind of information that we're hoping to get by the end of the year. That will put us in a good position for starting in 2022, where we will be really looking at analysis and bringing what we're learning to a number of these sub-regional tables as we start doing more of a gap analysis and continuing to engage. This would then lead us into actually developing sort of action plans in April through June. And then ultimately the last phase is really drafting and developing sub-regional plans and weaving them into the ILA required strategic plan, which is ultimately due August 2022. So that's a very hard deadline. We have to deliver on that, but this is to give us all a general sense of like, what are the phases of that we'll be going through in the next couple of months. And I believe that wraps up my update. So thank you all, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions for Alexis Council?
Mayor Backus has raised her hand.
Oh. Mayor Backus and then Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Alexis. One of the slides kind of surprised me, the data on it that said only 21 of the 38 cities are providing funding for homelessness related outreach or activities. Is that because you haven't talked with all 38, or is that really that only 21 of the 38 are providing funding?
That came from when over the summer, when Jason Johnson and Michelle Valdez were contracted to do this initial sort of asset mapping, they had contacted every jurisdiction and asked about the amount of funding they were putting forward. Some jurisdictions did not respond, and that was their ultimate finding, that they had identified 21 different cities. Some cities, the majority of cities provided their information on how much they were putting forward, but there were a few that they had identified. Yes, they're putting funding forward, but they did not submit information on just how much funding. And so I'm working collaboratively with those jurisdictions to figure that out.
Okay, thanks.
Of course.
Councilmember Stearns, go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thanks, Alexis. That was really fascinating. You mentioned the McKinsey report. I was just sort of curious. What can you remind me or the rest of us what the #1 driver of homelessness is in King County?
That is a great question. I don't know off the top of my head. There are a number of that report identified a number of key causes. My focus, just in all candor, was looking at their analysis on the funding figure and how they came to that. But I can absolutely provide the McKinsey report link. There's a summary of it on their website.
Okay, that's great. But in terms of funding, one of the things that we've really paid special attention to and learned about is equity. And so can you talk about how funding, you view funding will be done equitably?
Absolutely. I think as we're also looking at the kind of analytics part of where funding is going towards, we're looking at where dollars are coming from and where they're going to, not only regionally, but also towards serving which particular populations, namely Black, Indigenous, and our most affected and impacted populations by homelessness. Our community impact team is really structuring everything that we do in terms of analytics from a racial equity standpoint. And also, I think your question is also getting at kind of this contracting piece to how the KCRHA will then be distributing dollars out to the region. Is that correct, Council Member?
Yeah, you sniffed that out. But really just to get a general sense of what your take is on
Yeah, and I can touch briefly on, as we're looking to do a full system rebid and really reimagine how we fund, who we fund, equity is going to be core to how we kind of restructure and make those decisions.
So Alexis, I know you're in phase 1, so it's very early on. And as the Regional Homeless Authority is a new entity, it's going to take a while to get where we need to get. And you've outlined all the way through phase 4, the timelines. Couple things. We understand that the service providers do not go into the encampments where many of these folks are. What is the potential plan for having service providers be more involved with boots on the ground rather than trying to get people to come to them?
Great question, Deputy Mayor. And I think you all are kind of in a unique situation because you have somebody who's a part of the city of Auburn who is so actively going out into actual encampments and really standing side by side with folks. we are looking to implement a peer navigation program of folks who would be doing exactly that. When I've gone out with some other folks in the region who do the much more on the ground, actually going into encampments work, a lot of them actually are peers themselves. And so I think it is, as we look to stand up this peer navigation program, I imagine they're actually the ones that are really going to be taking that exact approach. In terms of actually encouraging other organizations to be doing that kind of approach, I think that remains to be seen, but something that would be a part of the conversation around a full system rebid, because frankly, as I'm sure most folks here on the call know, we really actually need folks going out and being in community with people, meeting folks where they're at.
Great, thank you. And also, and as you know, Kent Hayes, our outreach coordinator in Auburn, is doing a tremendous job with the folks in the encampments and others who are homeless. We find that it's very difficult to get the homeless, especially chronically homeless people, to go inside. So whether it be a shelter or into some sort of supportive housing or transitional housing, they've been in their situation for quite a period of time. To get them to go inside is something that they resist. They don't want to do in many cases. So how would the Homeless Authority kind of look at facilitating that process to work with people closer to try and convince them that the lifestyle they live can be improved by going inside?
Another great question. I think it's fair to say at this point, like we're talking about a smaller population of folks, but ones that arguably have very high needs. They have co-occurring maybe mental disorders or substance abuse, or just what we would call higher acuity. Our entire team, and I also think this is in reference to the question you had asked about actually getting out into community, our team actually does try to go out into the field as much as possible. I personally try to spend every Friday afternoon in an encampment or in person and with our service providers. And so that is not unique to me, that is something our entire team actually tries to do at some point on a pretty regular basis. Our team is looking to get trained as what we call motivational interviewing, which is a strategy, a technique within the service provision community that it really teaches you how to talk to folks who perhaps are hesitant about seeking services or getting additional help, how to talk to them in such a way that can be persuasive and open them up to the idea. And we're looking to implement that type of training for all of our service providers as we continue to stand up. A lot of our service providers are looking to us to provide different types of training. And that is one that we're keenly interested in doing, so more folks can be prepared to and skilled in having those conversations for folks who are hesitant.
Great, thank you. I have one more, and then Councilmember Stearns has another question. So on your key component number 2, talking about the 0 to 30%, and of course you are very familiar with this, but what is the plan to coordinate with PSRC on the regional housing strategy, and of course with the King County Affordable Housing Committee, with the work that's being done there on how we look at the 0 to 30% for those folks in the most need, knowing that the 0 to 30% process of building units is the most difficult to do because it's so highly subsidized, and developers just aren't that involved in doing that on a regular basis, and there are some happening. So what is the plan going forward of coordinating with the other organizations?
I will share, I reached out to Michaela I should clarify for the group. Michaela Dafford is the King County staff person who manages the Affordable Housing Committee. She leads the work around their planning processes, and that is a body that has stood up what they call the Regional Affordable Housing Dashboard, which has a whole wealth of information, and it's fantastic because you can toggle by jurisdiction and actually see affordable housing data by jurisdiction. And so early on when I started this role, I was like, we're going to need to map together that kind of information for our work. And so to answer your question, we have identified, yes, we need to work together on that. We aren't quite there yet though, but we've started the conversation. We've said we're going to need to figure out as we piece together our data, we will need to make sure that it is aligned. And further, I can absolutely see a path for aligning also in strategy between the two bodies. But I will share, I haven't touched base with PSRC folks. I know somebody else from our larger team has, but that's a good nudge for me that I got to make a call tomorrow.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much. Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Something else while you were talking, Alexis, popped in my mind. Do you know how many homeless people there are in our subregion? And can you give us a sense of, is that like Delta growing or shrinking, or what is it?
Oh, the question everybody kind of wants to know about. Our most recent data we have the point in time count from 2020, which was not an unsheltered street count. I think something else we are reckoning with as an agency is that point in time count data is not that great, especially when it comes to the subregions outside of Seattle. The methodology is, it just isn't consistent. It doesn't work for suburban and rural regions. So I don't feel confident in that data. And we know the numbers are really, really big. I will share, and some work has been done with the King County's former performance analytics team before they kind of migrated the information over to us, but some work was done to try and understand just how much our system was capturing folks who are experiencing homelessness through HMIS, but then also looking at related systems to understand how many folks are maybe in HMIS or not in HMIS, but registered as homeless in our behavioral health system or our school system and so on. And so I am not at liberty to share those numbers yet. That's something we're still trying to work through and identifying the information, but I think it's fair to say our numbers are much larger than Pitt has identified or HMIS has identified thus far. And so we'll be sure that will be communicated widely once we are able to share the conclusive findings from that. But it's fair to say that our numbers are much higher than the 12,000 identified from the last point in time count.
And is that a number that you feel is growing? I mean, are there more and more homeless people? I mean, more and more people becoming homeless? Is that?
I would share, yes, and anecdotally, I was in a conversation with a South King County provider. They're a family shelter provider, and they had called and let me know that they did intake for 4 families in one day. That had never happened before. They have been an organization that's been up for about, I think, 4 years now, and they did intake for not just 4 families, but 4 large families. 3 of the 4 families were what they consider large families, meaning 5 people or more. One of the families was 8 people. They had reported they had never seen anything like that, and they're very fearful this is the first kind of indication of the outcome of the eviction moratorium bridge and issues surrounding that. We're hearing a lot more folks are fearful that EPRAP is not going to come through. And pardon me, when I say EPRAP, I mean the Eviction Prevention and Rental Assistance Program. That money is rolling out, but the amount that EPRAP is providing often isn't actually covering the full amount of the debt that folks feel. Some families have been experiencing a lot of pushes from their landlords over the year, and we're just finding and hearing about more and more folks choosing to self-evict and just kind of cut their losses and leave. And so it's hard to tell at this point. We know 2020's point in time count data was not great because we didn't go out and do an unsheltered street count. We know more folks became homeless, and now we're about to see potentially another wave of added homelessness from the eviction moratorium.
Oh, wow. Thanks. I mean, that's scary.
It is. I do want to also share, I pulled up the McKinsey study. I'm not able to put it in the chat because there is no chat, but to answer your question, council member, the McKinsey study identifies economic growth in the region as the leading cause of homelessness. Because while the region has racked up impressive numbers in terms of job creation and growth, the housing growth just has not kept up to pace. And so the gap between housing supply and demand has driven prices up.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Alexis, council? Not seeing any. So Alexis, always good to see you again. Paul, welcome to you. And council, Prior to Alexis joining the Regional Homeless Authority, she was our Sound Cities Association staff member for our King County Affordable Housing Committee. And so she's very familiar with that process. And as she mentioned, working very closely with Michaela Daffern, who is the point person for the Affordable Housing Committee through King County as our kind of rep from King County to keep us on the straight and narrow at the King County Affordable Housing Committee. So Alexis is very, very involved and remains very, very involved in that process overall. So doing good work, and we appreciate what you've done. So thank you again for the presentation, and we look forward to seeing you soon again. Thank you.
You all have a good night.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right, council, we will now move into our next item for council discussion, and that's resolution number 5615. And see, I have a combination here of Director Faber and City Attorney Como.
Good afternoon or good evening, council and mayor. I will start by introducing Jamie Kelly, who is here to assist in the presentation of resolution number 5615 to council. And in addition, Josh Arndt will be assisting in the presentation on the property purchase piece. So Jamie, if you want to take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Kendra. Thanks, Deputy Mayor DeCourcy and council and mayor. So I'm Jamie Kelly. I'm the Planning Development Manager for the Parks Department. And so I'm here to give you a little bit of background about the Mill Creek assemblage acquisitions that we're calling it. So about a year ago, I was contacted by the King County Lower Green River steward or basin steward about target land acquisitions for future salmon habitat projects here in the city of Auburn. So it's basically a situation where the county would like to see the cities along the Green River be future sponsors for the future salmon habitat improvements. So I talked to Director Faber and Director Tate to kind of get an idea of the city's interest in sponsoring a future project like this. And in turn, we had some conversations with Councilmember Stearns, who's our RIA 9 representative, to gauge council support. And so with council support, we pursued some funding for this acquisition area. Funding for the parcels come in the form of King County Conservation Futures funding and King County Cooperative Watershed Management Grant. So each of the grants that we were awarded, or the city was awarded, was $83,050 for a total of $166,100. The two grants provide match for the other, so there are no city dollars or funding that are wrapped up in this acquisition. So the area is in North Auburn, 7.33 acres. It's located along Mill Creek in a degraded area that's, I think it's fallow farmland. And so the entire acquisition area is mapped as wetland area. Mill Creek is a salmon-bearing tributary to the Green River. And the city owns, worth noting that the city owns 2 parcels adjacent to the acquisition area. So the plan is I think, kind of to sponsor a similar project that we did with the Wetland 5K project, where in the environmental park, we relocated or realigned Mill Creek into its historical channel. So it will be a project very similar to that. Likely going to have some state and King County funding involved for that future habitat improvements. And I think that's about it in a nutshell for the background. And so I'll turn it over to Josh, who's going to talk about the purchase and sale part of it. And then we can answer any questions that you guys might have after he's done.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Kendra. So again, good evening, council and mayor. For the record, Josh Arndt, real estate manager here for the city of Auburn. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. So a little bit of what I have is going to overlap slightly here with some of the things that Jamie already said. But so my work in this is to take the properties that Jamie has provided for identification and to see what I can do about going out, working with the landowners to ultimately come up with some favorable terms to the city that I can then bring in front of council for their vote and ratification. So if I'm not mistaken, you all are looking at my screen.
We are, Josh. You're not on slideshow mode though.
I'm not. I thought I was. Where?
We can see your PowerPoint, but it's
small.
Yep.
All right. So where would I hit the slideshow?
the lower right side
Yep.
next to the Zoom.
Next to what now?
On the lower right hand side,
Yes.
next to the Zoom. Right there. Yep.
Got it. Yes.
You have to click it.
Start slideshow.
That works.
Still no? Still no work, not working?
Did it possibly pop up on another screen?
Yeah, I've got it. It's showing on mine as being whole, so that's why I was.
So move it to the other screen.
All right, my apologies. Let's try this one more time. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. All right, back on track. My apologies. Okay, so just to start off with a general description of where these properties are located, that being in Northwest Auburn, kind of southwest of 44th Street Northwest and I Street Northwest. You'll notice here on the picture graphic, this red line being State Route 167. As Jamie mentioned, these properties are vacant properties, just grass vegetation on them, no improvements or anything like that. This does include 6 separate land parcels that are really 2 separate real estate transactions because the properties are owned. One set of properties is owned by one party, a second set operated or owned by the second property, which is why again 2 separate land transactions, which are included in resolution 5615 and 5616. These properties were created through the short platting process. So there's two individual short plats, one SP-3-81 and the second being SP-2-81. This is important to note because as part of the creation of these properties, there is a right-of-way and utilities tract that runs down through the middle for the benefit for the future development of the properties created through the short platting process. As Jamie had mentioned, the city already owns 2 of them. So by acquiring the rest of the properties in the 2 short plats, the city will then have the full benefit of this tract that runs down through the middle, as well as a smaller tract that's kind of hard to see here that was made for the purposes of channel mitigation. So as I stated before, this is really 2 separate real estate transactions. Those highlighted in yellow, which are currently owned by the Kent E Corporation, and those highlighted here in red owned by Diamond J Investments. As Jamie mentioned previously, the purpose for this is to protect from future developments, as well as securing access and property rights for future salmon habitat improvement projects here to Mill Creek in this area. So some of the detail points for the transaction. Each of the two sellers agreed to sell their properties for what is equivalent to the 2020 tax assessed valuations. So I've put on here this in this little photo the tax assessed valuation that is relevant to each individual parcel. So for the Diamond J, those highlighted in red, that's a total of $106,500. And then for the Kent Yee highlighted in yellow, $52,600. So again, those are the purchase prices for those individual transactions, equal again to the 2020 tax assessed valuation. Also, as Jamie mentioned, funding for this purchase is coming by way of a grant. And as Jamie's had previously mentioned, there's no city matching funds as part of this. And then finally, as part of the transaction, the city will do a feasibility or diligence review of the properties just to get a full understanding of what is on site, what might be there, so that we can not end up into a situation where we're buying something that or the city purchases something that may have contaminants or anything, something of that nature. And then of course a title review as well. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. With that, I will stop and open it up to council for their questions.
Questions for Josh, council? Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thanks, Josh. I was wondering if the restoration of as we make more and more improvements to Mill Creek, is that more of like a juvenile resting place, or is that something where there might be spawning?
It's mostly off-channel habitat for juvenile resting. It's identified in the Ryan Iron Salmon Habitat Plan. As I think that there's also some coho spawning grounds up into Mill Creek as well, but mostly for off-channel habitat for salmonids.
Oh, okay, great. This is really cool. I appreciate all the work you guys are doing.
Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Jamie, I was curious, what other types of habitat restoration or mitigation for current conditions would we be looking at potentially?
I don't completely understand the question, but like I mentioned that we had done, the Wetland 5K project in the AEP. We've got ongoing efforts by Mid-Sound Fisheries, who has got King County funding to do basically vegetation.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah, so they're doing some maintenance at Fenster and at Isaac Evans, and they are fixing to add a site at Mary Olson Farm for Olson Creek. And that's been an amazing program that, because as a parks department, we run pretty lean in terms of park maintenance. And so when it comes to these natural areas and stuff, we just don't have the resources to keep up with the areas along the green and even the white for that matter, but mostly along the green. We do most years we do clean sweep projects at, and one or more projects along the Green River. And then after that day or a couple of other kind of, pop-up type of volunteer events, they just don't get a lot of attention. And so this whole program with Mid-Sound Fisheries, it's all funded by the county, and they come in and they They facilitate and organize these different volunteer events throughout the year. And so it's little to no city resources in terms of even staff time. But it's made a huge difference at Fenster with all the work that we've done there with the levee setback projects. There's a significant amount of blackberry and invasive species at Isaac Evans in the riparian area that they've done a ton of work on. And then, like I said, Mary Olson Farm with Olson Creek, we get in any given year, depending on conditions, we get, every species of salmonid that goes up and spawns in that short stretch at Olson Creek, or in Olson Creek as well. So it's, that's kind of, most of the efforts that we do, as the Parks Department goes, along with, any clean sweep projects or like an Eagle Scout project that pops up or, anything like that. So that's been an amazing program and work that wouldn't get done otherwise.
Thank you.
Other questions for Jamie, Josh, or Kendra, Council? Not seeing any. So Kendra, the next item on the agenda was the resolution 5616, but I don't believe we would have any other further presentations. These are combined.
You're correct, Deputy Mayor, unless council has any questions or anything that we can add, but the presentations you just received do cover both resolutions. Great,
thank you. Council, I will point out in our packet, in our background summary, it stated that prior to voting on resolution 5615 and 5616, City Council will be asked to vote on resolution 5614, which allows the city to accept and allocate grant funds from King County Conservation Futures and cooperative watershed management programs. So these are reimbursable grants with which funds are to be used for the purchase of the real property that has been described in both these resolutions and in the presentation. So, any further questions, Council? All right, Jamie, Josh, and Kendra, thank you very much. We will move on to resolution number 5624. And that is with Chief Collier.
Thanks to you, Deputy Mayor DeCoursey. So this resolution, as Councilor may recall, when they passed Ordinance 6830, it authorized us to go out for RFP regarding our body cam program and related equipment associated with that. So the Axon Corporation was the only one that met all of our requirements. So this resolution is to authorize the mayor to enter into a contract with them for the purpose of purchasing their product. So, and this would use, the second portion of the resolution is also authorizing the use of the ARPA funds for at least the first year of the contract with Axon.
Questions, Council? Councilmember J. Raj.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Chief Collier, I do have a question. Is that also includes the tasers as well, the updated ones?
Yeah, so the entire proposal includes the body-worn cameras, the cameras for our interview room, replacing all of our fleet cameras, tasers, the software for our UAVs, and the online portion of our evidence storage, which is evidence.com. So all that is included in the proposal and the contract.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much.
Other questions for Chief Collier or Council? Okay, not seeing any. Good work, Chief. Glad to see this coming forward, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we will now turn to our finance, technology, and economic development discussion items. And for that portion of the study session, I'll turn the meeting over to Councilmember Baggett.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We have two resolutions tonight involving the sale of city-owned real property. And with that, I believe it is our city attorney, Kendra Como, and possibly some help from Josh.
Thank you, Councilmember Baggett. Tonight, Josh will also present on Resolution 5617. He has prepared a PowerPoint that he's getting ready to share in just a minute.
All right, thank you, Kendra. Again, for the record, Josh Arndt, Real Estate Manager at City of Auburn. So let's see if I can not repeat the same mistake here. And let's go here. All right. Any better?
Wrong one again.
Let's see here. Why are we not? So when I open it, it pops up to a different screen and then I can't see the other one. So my apologies, why this? All right, let's try. Okay. Now we
There
should.
you go.
All right. Except for, no, that's because that's not the one. This is 1101. I've got too many presentations open. My apologies, council. So. Okay. Okay. So 302 Lund Road, this is for the proposed sale of city-owned property to Bridge Acquisition. So again, just a general idea of where this property is located. It is located west of City Hall, just south of West Main Street, kind of in between State Route 167 and the Interurban Trail. And you can see it here highlighted in yellow. This is an 8.26 acre parcel that the city purchased in 2006 for $180,000 for the overall enhancement of the city. This property is vacant. 2011 staff report did classify 8 of the 8.5 to 8.25 acres as a Category 2 wetlands. Council did always previously declare this property as surplus, and that is found in Section 1 of Resolution 5384. The property itself is zoned M1 light industrial, and the surrounding developed properties have all been developed for industrial uses and purposes. So a little bit about the buyer. Bridge, they're a real estate operating company, an investment manager. They focus on industrial real estate, particularly the acquisition and development of industrial real estate in both the US and the UK markets. They do own and operate roughly 5 million square feet of industrial property here in the Seattle region. One of those properties being located here in Auburn, and that's the photo that you see here, located at 701 15th Street Southwest. And just to provide kind of a awareness of where that is, just off to the picture to the right here is our maintenance and operations yard. So this property transaction details purchase price of $200,000 or an appraised value. Key point is that is whichever is greater. Okay. Bridge will be putting up $30,000 worth of earnest money, with portions of that earnest money becoming non-refundable and released to the city upon certain transactional milestones. Also, as part of this deal, Bridge will be paying all closing costs, including those closing costs that are typically incurred by the seller. So the city won't have any closing cost as part of this transaction in the conveyance to Bridge. Closing will be scheduled to take place within 30 days of waiver or an expiration of the buyer's due diligence and due diligence periods. And then it's also important to note that there is a public hearing set for this transaction next Monday at the October 18th council meeting, with voting on the legislation to take place after that public hearing has concluded. So with that, I will open it up to any questions.
Any questions, council? Councilmember Chris.
Thanks, Councilmember Baggett. Yeah, I had a question. So you mentioned that these were wetlands. Is that correct?
Yes. So an older staff report, one that was done.
Wait, that wasn't my question. I know, but I was just wondering if you could tell me or tell us more about what that means. And thanks.
So yes, so that's a good question. Basically, there's different points of the year. There's certain vegetation species that are only found where there's lots of water, be it either from flowage from outside properties that come seep onto the property, or a high water table. So when that's the case, there are also certain vegetative as well as animal and plant species that can be found on properties where there's typically an abundance of water found. That would be the case here. Like I said, an old study showed that most of that property, roughly 97% of that property, would be considered to have, these vegetative and or animal species typically found in wet areas on the property.
Oh, okay. So and is that like wetlands like defined by the State Department of Ecology or federal or?
Yeah, oftentimes your wetlands are governed by the Army Corps of Engineers, and there's different categories. So and I don't want to claim to know what's inclusive of a category 1 versus a category 2 and or category 3. But whatever those are those pieces that define whatever those are. Typically, that is an Army Corps of Engineers designation.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Josh? I have one, Josh, and it may be not pertaining to this property, but because this is a wetland and there are species of animals and birds and what have you that make that place their home, are we or the buyer required to provide other locations or other similar properties available for as a result of this sale?
Yeah, so anytime you've got development on wetlands, there are what's called mitigation proceedings that need to be done. And there's different ways to go about doing that. King County has a program that you can buy into and buy shares. So King County holds properties, basically what they call a wetland bank. And so when there's mitigating or when there's development on wetland properties, you can pay the county that will then replace the wetlands that are lost based upon certain criteria ratios. And there's a number of different things that determine what those ratios are. Some of it is, are you creating wetlands where there once were none, or are you or is there Is it a circumstance where you're taking wetlands and you're making them, you're improving upon them? So there's different things involved. So that's one avenue that a buyer or any developer will have available to them, is they can buy into this program. The second is doing exactly what you said, council member, and it's replacing those wetlands somewhere else. Typically when that's done, you're actually either enhancing or creating, again, depending on what's done, but you're either enhancing or creating more wetlands than what is being lost for the development, right? So just, as a point of illustration, if you're going to take and really destroy through the process of development 1 acre of wetlands, then you would be required to create maybe 2 acres of wetlands somewhere else, or enhance 4 acres of wetlands to make up for that 1 acre of wetlands that's lost. And typically when you're doing that, they ask for that to be located within the same watershed as the wetlands that are being destroyed.
Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Councilmember Baggett. Yeah, so I mean, I guess I wanted to follow up on that because, at least to me, the wetlands have an incredible value for our city. So can we ask the buyer to do the enhancement restoration wetlands bank in our city? I mean, I just hate to see our city lose wetlands and then, it all go to the benefit of like Bothell or Bellevue or wherever. I mean, not that they're bad, but I just, it seems like it'd be great to keep that value within the city.
Yeah, so I would have to defer to probably Director Tate on the governance of how those work. But what I can say is, yes, because this property has wetlands on it, if that property is developed for an industrial building, those wetlands will be replaced. There's no way around that.
Right. Yeah. I'm just saying that as, in terms of value to the people of Auburn, it seems like it'd be a good thing to have the wetlands replaced in our city rather than just have more big box buildings and then another city get the benefit of more wetlands.
Yeah, understood. Like I said, I don't, here's Jeff.
I can add a little bit.
Did you want to jump in here?
Sure, I can add a little bit more to that. I mean, typically, they are replaced within our community. There is an exception to that when it's just not possible, and that is that there is an allowance that they at least can be have to be replaced within our watershed. So there's kind of a sequencing process you go through to evaluate that, and you want them to be on site. That's where you want them to be. I mean, first it's avoidance, then it's replacement on site, then it's replacement nearby into a connected waterway or hydrologically connected. So there's this sequence you go through, and the very last option would be that you could, in theory, replace them within our watershed outside of our city. But that is, in my time here, I'm not sure if I've seen that happen yet.
Thanks, Jeff. That's good to know.
Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. We'll jump into resolution 5621. Kendra?
Thank you, Councilmember Baggett. I'll let Josh have a minute to load the next PowerPoint, and I apologize. I know this is a real estate heavy meeting, but we wanted to combine several of these transactions for council's edification and being able to combine things for votes next week. Resolution number 5621 addresses the property that we currently lease to the Valley Regional Fire Authority with our partnership with VRFA. And we now are bringing this legislation forward to ask council to declare this property as surplus and allow VRFA to purchase it from the city. They are currently the lessee of the property. And with that, I will turn it over to our real estate manager, Josh when he's ready to start the PowerPoint.
Okay, third time's a charm.
Oh, you got it on the first shot.
All right, third time is a charm. I'm slow, but I do learn. All right.
There you go.
So as Kendra mentioned, this is for the proposed surplus and sale of city-owned property located at 1101 D Street Northeast in Auburn, otherwise known as VRFA Station 31. And so the proposed surplus and sale of that property to VRFA. So again, general location. This property is located north of downtown, adjacent to the downtown Green River campus. Up here in the upper left-hand corner, that is the Lowe's building with Fred Meyer located to the south. So just a little bit of history. The city acquired this property in 1984, and then shortly thereafter began making improvements to the property for its use as a fire station. And then on January 1st, 2007, Valley Regional Fire Authority was created, and it replaced the Auburn and Pacific fire departments, whereby providing the fire and EMS services to Auburn, Pacific, and the Algona areas. As part of that transition from the Auburn Fire Department into Valley Regional Fire, the city retained all ownership it had in properties that were being used as fire stations, and then leased those fire stations to VRFA. So Station 31 included. And then, since that time, VRFA has continued to operate Station 31 as a fire station. In fact, Station 31 serves as VRFA's headquarters. So some of the deal points for this, the proposed purchase price for this is $2,030,000. And it's important to note that that price was set by doing a fair market appraisal. There are some both pre and post closing obligations for each party as part of this transaction. So the pre-closing obligations, when the city was approached by VRFA and we started looking at the property, we wanted to make sure that if there were any future needs for right of way or anything else, that we accounted for those as part of the sale up front, rather than having to go back and obtain whatever was needed. And so through that study, it was determined that there would be some future right-of-way enhancements along D Street that would require an additional 5.5 feet along that property line. So prior to any sale taking place and the conveyance of the property, the city will need to dedicate a 5.5 strip along 1101 there. We're going to have to dedicate that to the city for right-of-way purposes. And then there is a emergency traffic signal located there in that vicinity, though that emergency traffic signal is located in the right-of-way. The ownership of that signal will not transfer with the property. However, the power source that feeds that signal comes directly from the building itself. So because the buildings will the ownership of the buildings will transfer, but not the emergency signal, we needed to resource the power that was feeding that emergency signal. And so as part of this transaction, again, before the conveyance of the property, before the deal closes, VRFA will need to go in and sever the power source that comes that goes to the traffic signal from the building, sever it from there, but reconnect it to an existing power box that's owned by the city, located just to the north of the property. And then once the transaction closes, immediately after it closes, really, then VRFA and the city will need to execute a water utility easement, because there is a water line that is located, public water line that is located on the property that will not convey to VRFA. So there will need to be an easement so that the city has all of its rights and access needs to be able to enter onto the property and make any repairs necessary to that facility. Now, the stormwater facilities on that property, when Public Works looked at those, it was determined that those stormwater facilities only service that property. They only service the station property. They don't serve it. They don't take on excess runoff or whatever from the public right of way or any properties outside of 1101 there. So because of that, the ownership in those stormwater facilities will transfer to VRFA along with the property. And as part of that, the city has certain standards when those situations occur, when you've got privately owned stormwater facilities. The city has certain standards that the owners of those facilities must maintain those facilities at. And so that's no different for VRFA. As part of that process, the city requires the private owner to sign what's called a stormwater easement and maintenance agreement, otherwise known as a SWEMA. So in the event that the private owner is not maintaining those facilities to city standards, it gives the cities the right to enter upon the property, make those necessary and needed repairs to make sure that the system continues to function properly. And then the last thing, again, as I previously mentioned, right now this property is currently being leased by VRFA and has been since 2007. So there will need to be an amendment to that existing lease agreement, effectively taking 1101 D Street or Station 31 property out of the leasehold because VRFA will be the new owners of that property. And I say that is a lease amendment because there are other properties that VRFA will continue to lease from the city and operate as a fire station, and those being Station 32 located on R Street, Station 33 located up in Lakeland Hills, and then Station 35 out there at GSA. So again, just like the previous transaction, there is a public hearing set for next Monday, October the 18th at the regularly scheduled council meeting. And the voting on the legislation for this will again take place after that public hearing has closed. So with that, I'm going to again turn it over to council to ask any questions you might have.
Deputy Mayor DeCoursey.
Thank you, Councilor Baggett. So Josh, the purchase and sale agreement includes the language for the right-of-way dedication. Does this still have to come before council as a separate resolution for that right-of-way dedication?
No, because we're including that as part of the purchase and the purchase and sale for this property. You'll note in next week's packet when the contract is there, the right-of-way the need for the right-of-way dedication is described in the body of the contract with an exhibit showing a replica of what the conveyance deed would look like being attached as an exhibit. So
okay,
part of your vote will be to include the right-of-way dedication.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from council for Josh or Kendra? Not seeing any. Kendra, Josh, thank you so much for the presentation. And with that, I will return it back over to Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Baggett. So that brings us to the end of our discussion items this evening, Council. Appreciate everybody's diligence in putting these together. Quite a few nice discussions, and our real estate conveyances are many right now. Do we have any other discussion items this evening? Councilmember Malinga.
I just had a question. I want to know, do we have a strategic plan that's for the city or a strategic plan that's for city council? And if we do, is there any way I can get a copy of it?
Deputy Mayor, if I might, Councilmember
Yeah, go ahead.
Malenga, strategic plan of what nature? I mean, there are several strategic plans throughout the city, so I'm just wondering what you're
Just, I mean,
looking
I thought
to
there
see.
was one, I just want to know if there's one general one that's just for the vision of the city for the next 5 years. I didn't know there was one in each department, but if there is there ways I can see them?
Well, there's not one specifically for each department necessarily, but strategic planning is usually done through the council visioning retreats, and that has not occurred for well, you were in the finance retreat shortly before we shut down in-person meetings. That was the finance retreat, but the visioning retreat has not occurred for a while. We have numerous plans. There's an economic development strategic plan and other strategic plans, and we can make that available to you.
Yes, I wanted to know just where they were housed and how I can get a hold of them.
Okay, I will ask our team to share those with you.
Thank you so much.
Councilmember Stearns.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just wanted to wish everyone a happy Indigenous Peoples' Day and to thank the mayor for her proclamation.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion items? I see your shirt, yes. And any new business this evening? Okay, not seeing any. Council and guests, thank you very much for your time this evening, and have a great evening, and enjoy yourselves, and we are now adjourned. Good night.